Rex Taylor stood at the observation window, staring out into the void of space. The endless stretch of blackness beyond the glass was interrupted only by the occasional flicker of stars, distant and cold. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the window, his mind far from the serenity of the view. He had been on this ship for what felt like ages now, and though the mission was important, his thoughts kept drifting back to Earth, to the life he'd left behind. A life that, for now, felt distant and far out of reach. He wasn't the type to show it, but Rex had always been someone who sought meaning in the small moments. There was something about the quiet beauty of space that pulled at him, even though he was surrounded by high-tech gadgets, alien cultures, and endless protocol. The reality was that space travel and the political weight of his current assignment was far less glamorous than the movies made it out to be. It was mostly hours spent in sterile rooms, long meetings, and, most frustratingly, endless negotiations. Still, Rex was a soldier. A soldier who had served his time in battle and now found himself thrust into a different kind of war, a war for peace. The mission was simple: to negotiate a treaty between humanity and the Thalarians, a species that had recently made contact with Earth. They were one of the most advanced civilizations Rex had ever encountered, their ships capable of traveling faster than light, their technology light years ahead of anything humanity had developed. It was their sheer power that made them so valuable. They held the keys to intergalactic peace, or at least the ability to control it. The task at hand was delicate. Humanity had barely established communication with the Thalarians, and now it was up to Rex and his fellow diplomats to ensure that both sides could coexist without conflict. Rex's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of his communicator. He tapped it to his wrist and read the message, a brief notification telling him that his meeting with Kalara was about to begin. Kalara, the name echoed in his mind. She was the Thalarian diplomat assigned to their mission, an essential part of the treaty process. Rex had met her a few times in passing, always at official functions. She was unlike any alien he had ever seen. Tall, with glowing skin that shimmered in the light like the surface of water, and eyes that seemed to shift color depending on the angle. Her presence was intimidating, not in the sense of her size, but in the way she commanded the room with nothing but her gaze. Yet, there was something else about her, something Rex couldn't quite place. He had felt it the first time they had spoken, a subtle shift in the air, something beneath the surface that made him want to know more. Rex didn't know what it was about Kalara that had caught his attention. She was clearly intelligent, efficient, and dedicated to her people. Her calm demeanor made her the perfect diplomat, always composed, always professional. But there was a mystery about her. He had seen it in her eyes, that fleeting moment of something different, a vulnerability that seemed to slip away as quickly as it came. He made his way down the hallway, the rhythmic hum of the ship's engine the only sound accompanying him. As he entered the conference room, his eyes fell on Kalara immediately. She was already there, standing by the large table, her gaze focused on the datapads in front of her. As always, she wore a simple but elegant outfit, her attire made of a material Rex had never seen before, sleek and almost liquid-like in its movement. Her purple-hued skin seemed to glow softly in the artificial light of the room. Kalara looked up as Rex entered, her eyes locking with his. The briefest of smiles crossed her lips, a gesture so small that if Rex hadn't been paying attention, he would have missed it. "Rex," Kalara said, her voice soft and melodic, yet carrying the weight of someone used to being in charge. "It's good to see you again." Rex nodded and took his seat at the table. "Likewise," he replied, offering her a small smile. The usual formalities were already in place, but there was something in the air today, something different, a sense of anticipation that made the normally dull proceedings seem charged with something more. They got down to business quickly, as they always did. The topic of the day was the progress of the treaty negotiations, how far they had come, and what remained to be done. Rex was used to these kinds of meetings. The conversations were always polite, measured, and filled with carefully chosen words. But there was a tension beneath the surface. The Thalirians had their own agenda, and Rex had learned to trust his instincts. Despite their outward calm, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. The discussion continued for some time, but Rex couldn't help but steal glances at Kylara as she spoke. There was something about her poise, the way she held herself with such grace, yet with an unspoken power that demanded respect. She didn't seem like the kind of person who would get flustered or lose control. But then, something happened that Rex didn't expect. As he spoke, trying to ease the tension in the room with a light-hearted comment, he noticed Kylara's eyes widen ever so slightly. Her usual calm demeanor faltered for just a moment, and Rex saw something there, something that made him pause. "Thanks, love," he said casually, handing her a data pad. The words were meant to be nothing more than a passing remark, but as soon as they left his mouth, Rex knew he had said something wrong. Kylara froze, her entire body stiffening as if she had just heard a sound that completely disrupted her understanding of the world. For a moment there was silence. Rex felt his heart race. He didn't know why, but he could feel the shift in the room. Kylara's eyes locked onto his, her violet irises filled with something Rex couldn't quite read. The look was intense, as if the words he had spoken had ignited something inside her, something unexpected. "Love." Kylara's voice barely broke the silence, her tone questioning yet soft. You called me that," Rex blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. It was a simple phrase, one he often used in conversation without thinking much of it. "Yeah, I guess I did. It's just a casual thing, no harm intended." Kylara's expression remained unreadable for a long moment, and Rex found himself wondering if he had made a grave mistake. He had no idea why, but her reaction felt like the start of something bigger. I've never been called that before," she said softly, her gaze never leaving his. Rex wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't meant to make her uncomfortable. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said quickly, hoping to ease the tension. "It's just a figure of speech, you know." Kylara blinked, almost as if trying to process the information. "A figure of speech," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I see." She looked away then, her expression shifting as she looked out the window to the stars, the distant lights reflecting in her eyes. Rex couldn't help but feel that he had just cracked open something inside her, something he didn't fully understand. For the rest of the meeting, the conversation felt different. Kylara was still composed, still professional, but there was an undercurrent to her behavior now, a tension that hadn't been there before. Every time their eyes met, Rex felt a strange pull, a connection that was impossible to ignore. When the meeting finally concluded, Kylara stood up, her movements graceful as always. "Thank you, Rex," she said, her tone distant but polite. "I look forward to our next discussion." Rex nodded, trying to maintain his usual easygoing demeanor. "Of course. See you soon, Kylara." As she left the room, Rex stood in place, staring after her. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. Something that had nothing to do with the treaty or the politics of their mission. It was something deeper, something personal. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. There was no denying it now. Rex Taylor, soldier, diplomat, and eternal skeptic, had just encountered something he didn't quite understand. And for the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering if the cold, sterile vastness of space might just hold a spark of something more, something human, something real. Rex Taylor had always believed that the heart of diplomacy was in the words you chose. Every phrase, every sentence was meant to strike a balance between truth and tact. After all, when dealing with beings from other worlds, especially a species as advanced as the Thalirians, you had to tread carefully. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the strange feeling that lingered after that simple exchange with Kylara. It had been days since the meeting, and Rex still couldn't shake the image of her face when he'd casually called her love. It wasn't as if he'd never used the term before. It was just a habit he had developed over the years, a way of softening his tone in tense moments. But with Kalara, it had been different. There was something about her reaction, the way she froze as if the word had struck her in some deep, unexpected place. He had seen her stoic composure slip, just for a moment, and it made him wonder what it was that had made her react that way. Days passed, and the usual diplomatic talks continued, but Rex noticed that Kalara's presence seemed heavier than before. Every glance they shared felt charged with an unspoken tension. She was still polite, still the diplomat she had always been, but Rex couldn't ignore the subtle shift in the air between them. The words he had casually thrown her way seemed to be the catalyst for something he couldn't yet understand. Rex found himself distracted in his work. He was supposed to be focused on the treaty, on the intricacies of trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and military cooperation between Earth and the Thalirians. But every time he sat across from Kalara in their meetings, his mind kept drifting to that one moment, that one word. It had been an innocent slip of the tongue, hadn't it? Kalara, on the other hand, had her own struggles to deal with. Since the meeting with Rex, she found herself increasingly aware of his every action. It wasn't just his casual demeanor that set him apart from the others, but something deeper. His humanity, the way he spoke, the way he moved, it was different from the calculated, measured approach of her own people. The Thalirians were a species of great intellect and restraint, and they prided themselves on their emotional control. Yet here was a human, a species that to them was still so new, so raw, who seemed to act without thinking, without care for the consequences of his words. It had bothered Kylara at first, the ease with which he spoke, the way he seemed to take everything in stride. The Thalirians were not used to such informality, but over time that unease transformed into something else. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Rex's actions weren't random. He wasn't just another human diplomat trying to navigate their complex society. He was different, and for reasons Kylara didn't fully understand, it was his difference that intrigued her. At night, when the ship was quiet and the lights dimmed, Kylara often found herself lying awake, her mind racing. It was difficult to admit, but she couldn't stop thinking about Rex. The way his eyes met hers with a warmth she had never seen in a Thalirian's gaze. The way he spoke to her with such ease, as if she were just another person, not a representative of a species so vastly different from his own. One evening, after a particularly long day of negotiations, Kylara decided to speak to him about it. She knew it was dangerous. She knew it could jeopardize everything, her mission, her reputation, and possibly the peace between their worlds. But she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. She had to understand what was happening, even if it meant stepping outside the boundaries of diplomacy. Rex was in the lounge area, staring out at the stars through the large windows, his usual relaxed posture making him look almost too comfortable. He didn't notice her approach until she was standing beside him, her reflection mirrored in the glass. "Kalara," Rex said, turning to face her. "You're up late. Long day," she nodded, but instead of answering his question, she asked, "Rex, about the word you used, love. Why did you say it?" Rex blinked, surprised by her sudden directness. "It's just something I say sometimes," he replied with a shrug. "I didn't mean anything by it, it's just how I speak." Kalara didn't seem satisfied with that answer. "But you said it to me, and I don't understand, it felt different to me, it felt like something else." Rex could see that she was struggling to articulate what she felt. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the composed facade she usually wore so well. He hadn't expected her to bring it up, but now that she had, he found himself at a loss for words. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said softly. "It's just a word I use, Kalara. I didn't think it would have that kind of impact." But Kalara wasn't convinced. "You didn't think about it at all?" she asked, her tone laced with both curiosity and something else, something Rex couldn't quite place. In Thalirian culture, we don't use words like that. Words are powerful. They carry meaning. When you spoke to me, it felt unexpected. As if you were letting something else slip through. Rex sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know how to explain it," he said, his voice quieter now. "It's just the way I talk. It's casual, familiar. A way to show I don't mean harm, that's all." Kalara studied him carefully. Her violet eyes seemed to pierce through him, reading him in a way that made Rex feel exposed. "And yet, you didn't think about how it would make me feel," he thought for a moment before answering. "No. I guess I didn't." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "But maybe I should have." The silence between them stretched, heavy and thick. Rex was unsure of what to say next, but Kalara's eyes softened just a little as she spoke again. "It's not just about the word, it's about what it means. You humans, your language, your emotions, they're so different from ours. Sometimes I can't tell what's real, what's just a gesture or a formality, and what's truly meant. I don't know what to make of it." Rex stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "Maybe that's the problem. You're trying to make sense of something that isn't meant to make sense. Humans don't always follow logic. Sometimes we just act, say things without thinking. We're not always perfect. But it's real, and maybe that's something you'll have to learn, Kalara." Kalara looked down at the floor for a moment, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on being logical, calculating, unflappable. But with Rex, nothing seemed predictable. She had never met a human like him, and it both unsettled and fascinated her. There was a part of her that wanted to push him away, to tell him that his way of speaking, his way of being, was too strange, too alien. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to admit, wanted to understand him more. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Kalara whispered, almost to herself. Rex didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, his hands in his pockets, watching her. For the first time, he wondered if maybe there was more to this assignment than just political negotiations. Maybe, in the vastness of space, with all the complexities of alien cultures and intergalactic treaties, there was room for something else, something personal. "I don't know either," Rex finally said, his voice soft, "but maybe we'll figure it out together." Kalara's gaze met his, and for a moment the distance between them seemed to shrink. She wasn't sure what this was, what it could become, but she couldn't deny that there was something there, something real. The sound of footsteps broke the moment, and Rex quickly turned away, instinctively shifting back into his diplomatic role. But Kalara stood frozen, her mind still swirling with the possibility of something more than just a treaty, something that neither she nor Rex had ever expected. In the days that followed, the diplomatic talks continued, but the dynamic between Rex and Kalara had changed. They were still formal in their conversations, still working together toward the goal of peace. But every word, every glance, now carried an undercurrent that neither could ignore. It was a tension that neither had anticipated, and yet it was becoming impossible to deny. Kalara had never been one to let emotions cloud her judgment. But now, standing side by side with Rex, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known about diplomacy, about herself, and about the strange, unpredictable humans who had so easily slipped past the walls she had so carefully built around her heart. The days seemed to blur together as the diplomatic talks continued aboard the ship. For Rex, the meetings had become a repetitive cycle. Sit across from Kalara, discuss the progress of the treaty, listen to the occasional back and forth between Earth and Thalirian representatives. It was a dance of words, a carefully orchestrated negotiation that seemed to push them toward an agreement, but never quite seemed to get them there. But amidst all the formalities, Rex couldn't help but notice the changes in Kalara. She was still the composed diplomat everyone expected her to be, always polite, always controlled. Yet there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of something deeper. When their gazes met across the table, there was an intensity that hadn't been there before. She seemed more aware of him now, more present. It made Rex uneasy, and yet strangely, it also made him feel more alive. He had tried to push it from his mind. After all, this mission was about diplomacy, about securing peace between two very different species. There was no room for distractions. But every time Kalara spoke, every time their hands brushed when they passed something across the table, Rex couldn't help but feel that invisible thread pulling them together. Kalara, too, felt the change. She had never allowed herself to get involved with anyone, certainly not a human. Her people were not known for their emotional connections. The Thalirians valued intellect and restraint. They had no use for feelings, no place for attachments that could cloud their judgment. But Rex was different. The words he used, so casual, so full of warmth, were foreign to her, yet they had started to stir something within her that she couldn't ignore. It was not just his words but his presence. He had an openness about him that was so unlike the controlled, measured behavior she was used to in her own people. She caught herself thinking about him more than she should. It was distracting. It was dangerous. But it was also exhilarating. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Kalara found herself wandering the halls of the ship, her thoughts racing. She needed air, space to think. The corridors were quiet, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines in the background. She walked aimlessly, not really paying attention to where she was going, until she found herself standing in front of a small observation deck. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and she stepped inside. The view of space was breathtaking. Stars stretched out endlessly, their light twinkling like diamonds in the dark void. It was a sight that always made her feel small, insignificant, yet strangely connected to everything around her. She stood there for a while, just gazing out into the endless expanse. She wasn't sure how long she had been standing there when she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Rex. She could feel his presence, just as she always did. He came up beside her, his gaze following hers as he looked out into space. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. It was as if they both needed the silence to settle, to breathe. Finally, Rex spoke, his voice low and steady. "You're thinking about the treaty, aren't you?" Kalara didn't answer at first. She didn't need to, it was obvious. "It's complicated," she said softly, her eyes still focused on the stars. "I never imagined peace could be so fragile." Rex nodded, his gaze still on the view. "Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like walking a tightrope. One wrong move and everything could fall apart." "I don't know if I'm ready to be the one to make that move," Kalara admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "There's so much at stake. Not just for the Thalirians, but for your people too. I've spent my entire life studying diplomacy, understanding the complexities of different cultures, but this feels different. It feels personal." Rex turned to her then, his gaze meeting hers. "It is personal, Kalara. That's the thing. We're not just talking about governments and treaties. We're talking about people, people who have to live with the consequences of the decisions we make." Kalara looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. She had never thought of it that way. In her world, the personal had always been kept separate from the professional. Emotions were to be controlled, suppressed. But here, in this moment with Rex standing beside her, she couldn't help but feel a connection. Something that went beyond the treaty, beyond the political discussions. She didn't know what it was, but it was real. "Do you ever wonder," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "if we're making the right choice, if we're doing the right thing?" Rex took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. "I think about it every day, but I also think that the right choice isn't always clear. Sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith." "A leap of faith," Kalara repeated, as if testing the words on her tongue. "I've never been good at that." "Well," Rex said with a grin, "maybe I can teach you. Humans aren't perfect, but we're good at jumping." Kalara didn't laugh, but the corners of her lips twitched upward. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her smile like that, and it felt strange in a good way. Her people didn't smile much. They didn't need to. But Rex, with his easygoing nature and casual words, had a way of disarming her that no one else had ever managed. They stood there in silence again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. They were two people, alone in the vastness of space, sharing a moment that neither had anticipated. Kalara felt something stir within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. It was vulnerability. It was longing. It was fear. Fear of what this connection could mean. Fear of what it could cost them both. As the hours passed, Rex and Kalara talked. Not about the treaty, not about politics, but about themselves. They shared stories of their homes, of their people, of their lives before they had come to this point. For the first time, they saw each other not as representatives of their species, but as individuals, as people. Kalara learned more about Rex than she had in all their previous meetings. She learned about his childhood on Earth, about the loss he had suffered during the war, about the dreams he had of a future where humanity and other species could coexist peacefully. And in return, Rex learned about Kalara's own struggles, about the weight of her responsibilities as a diplomat, and the pressure she had always felt to uphold the honor of her people. As the conversation began to wind down, there was a quiet understanding between them. They both knew the challenges that lay ahead. They both knew that the treaty was far from complete, that there were still many obstacles to overcome. But in this moment, it didn't seem as important. What mattered was the connection they had found, the bond that had formed between them without either of them realizing it. "You know," Rex said softly, "I never thought I'd be in a position like this. I never thought I'd be standing here, talking to someone like you." Kalara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Rex said, his voice quiet but full of sincerity, "that I never thought I'd find someone I could truly talk to, someone who understood what I was feeling. You're not like anyone I've ever met." Kalara felt her heart skip a beat. She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't even sure what she was feeling. But in that moment, she knew that everything had changed. The treaty, the negotiations, the future of their people, it all seemed so distant now. What mattered, at least for this moment, was the person standing beside her. "I don't know what this means," Kalara said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think we're on the same path now, Rex, together." Rex smiled, his eyes softening. "Yeah, I think we are." And for the first time, Kalara allowed herself to believe it. That maybe, just maybe, this strange, unpredictable human who had entered her life was the key to something more than just a treaty. Maybe he was the key to something greater. Something that neither of them had ever expected. The final days of the peace talks were upon them. The tension in the ship had reached its peak. Everyone knew that the fate of both humanity and the Thalirians rested on the outcome of these negotiations. Rex could feel the weight of the responsibility bearing down on him. He had spent countless hours in meetings, presenting proposals, answering questions, trying to smooth over the differences between the two species. But in the back of his mind, there was always the nagging thought that they might fail. The fragile peace they had been working toward could shatter in an instant. The treaty was nearly complete. All the major points had been discussed and agreed upon. But there was still one last obstacle to overcome. There was a faction of Thalirians who believed that humanity was a threat, a species too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted. These radicals wanted to sabotage the treaty, to ignite a war between their two civilizations. Kalara had made it clear that this faction was powerful, and their influence stretched far within the Thalirian hierarchy. If they couldn't be convinced to accept the treaty, the entire peace process would collapse. Rex knew that Kalara was working tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to find a way to neutralize the radical faction. But as the days wore on, he could see the toll it was taking on her. She was always tired, her eyes sunken with the weight of the pressure. He had seen it before, the signs of someone who was carrying a burden too heavy to bear. And yet, despite it all, she remained composed, still the Thalirian diplomat who commanded respect. But Rex also knew that beneath her calm exterior, something was changing. He could see it in the way she looked at him now, the subtle shifts in her expressions when they were alone. The connection they had forged over the past few weeks had deepened into something undeniable. They no longer just shared glances or words in the sterile setting of their meetings. They shared moments, quiet moments, vulnerable moments, moments that had nothing to do with diplomacy. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Rex found Kylara standing alone in the observation room. She was staring out into space, her face illuminated by the distant stars. He hesitated for a moment before walking up beside her. She didn't turn to look at him, but he could feel the tension in her posture. She was lost in thought, as she always was when she was troubled. "You're not alone, you know," Rex said softly, his voice breaking the silence. Kylara turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. "I know," she replied quietly, "but sometimes it feels like it. I'm carrying so much, Rex, it's hard to keep going." Rex didn't say anything at first. He understood. He could see the exhaustion in her, the way she held herself as though she were constantly on the edge of breaking. He stepped closer, his presence a silent offer of support. "I don't know what's going to happen," Kylara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "This treaty, it's everything. But I'm afraid that no matter what we do, there are forces at play that we can't control, forces that want war, not peace." Rex's heart ached for her. He had seen the toll this mission had taken on her, the strain in her eyes, the weight of the decisions she had to make. But he also knew that Kylara wasn't one to give up. She had fought for peace her entire life. She wouldn't stop now. "Maybe we don't control everything," Rex said gently, his hand resting on the railing beside them, "but we control what we can, and that's enough. You've done everything you can, Kylara. You've been the one to keep this peace alive. You're stronger than you know." Kylara looked at him then, her eyes searching his face. She didn't speak for a long moment, but when she did, her voice was softer, almost tentative. "I don't feel strong anymore, Rex. I don't know how to keep going." Rex reached out, his hand brushing against hers. It was a simple gesture, but it was enough to send a jolt of warmth through Kylara. She looked down at their hands, the touch comforting in its simplicity. When she met his gaze again, she found herself uncertain of what to say next. She had spent so long keeping her emotions under control, keeping them buried deep inside. But now, in this moment with Rex standing beside her, it felt as though the walls she had built around herself were beginning to crumble. "I'm here, Kylara," Rex said softly. "I'm here for you. Whatever happens, you don't have to do this alone." For the first time in a long while, Kylara allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, the tension in her shoulders easing. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, but the moment was fleeting. The reality of their situation was never far from their minds. They couldn't afford to forget the gravity of their mission. The treaty was still at risk. The radicals who opposed it were growing more vocal, more determined to sabotage everything they had worked for. As the hours passed, Rex and Kylara continued to talk, the conversation shifting between personal matters and the weight of their responsibilities. But in the back of Kylara's mind, there was a gnawing fear. The radical faction wasn't the only problem. There was something else, something she had been keeping from Rex. She had known for a while now, but she hadn't found the right moment to tell him. Finally, as the stars outside began to blur into a haze of distant lights, Kylara spoke. "There's something I need to tell you, Rex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something important." Rex turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "What is it?" Kylara hesitated. The weight of her words hung in the air, but she knew that Rex deserved the truth, even if it made things more difficult. "There's a plan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. a plan to assassinate the leaders of the human delegation. It's been set in motion by the radicals. Rex's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. He had suspected that the radicals might try something drastic, but he had never imagined that it would go this far. Are you saying? I don't know when it will happen, Kalara continued, her voice tight with fear. But it's coming, and if we don't act quickly, everything we've worked for will be destroyed. Peace will be lost and a war will begin. Rex didn't hesitate. His mind immediately went into overdrive, processing the information Kalara had just given him. The stakes were higher than ever now. If the radicals succeeded in their plan, everything would fall apart. The treaty would be nothing more than a distant dream. I'll protect you, Kalara, Rex said firmly. And I'll protect the treaty. We'll stop them before it's too late. Kalara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She knew that Rex would do everything in his power to stop the assassination plot. But the reality was that they were running out of time. The clock was ticking, and they had no idea when the attack would come. All they could do was act fast and hope they were ready. As Rex turned to leave, determined to rally the human delegation and ensure their safety, Kalara stayed behind, her heart heavy with the weight of everything that was happening. She had never felt so vulnerable, so unsure of what the future held. But she knew one thing for certain: whatever happened next, she would face it alongside Rex, together.